funny to hear you say the Nick Caley dream, because
Yeah.
like it's so funny how this stuff works, right? Because like when the name Caley first got floated, like we're all digging into him. We're like, the Patriots tight end coach, like, oh, like, and then like everybody kind of talked himself into it, and they were like, oh, he's a McVay understudy, like, and then you get to the point where you're like, why aren't they interviewing Caley? So it goes from this guy that you've barely heard of to like, we need to get this guy in a
That's a
span of
great
2 days,
point. It's a great
which is
point.
so funny. And we'll see how it shakes out. And as far as this Engstrand guy goes, so like basically the first thing I noticed was that he was a quarterback at San Diego State with Muji and with O'Connell. I think he was a little older than O'Connell, a little younger than Muji, so he's like kind of right there in the middle. Interesting career where like right after he graduated, he hopped on and got hired by Jim Harbaugh at not San Diego State, but San Diego. Harbaugh was the head coach there before he went to Stanford from 2004 to 2006. And he got hired by Harbaugh as a graduate assistant. And then after Harbaugh departed for Stanford, he stayed on at San Diego as running backs coach and then quarterbacks coach and then offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach and then assistant head coach, offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. So pretty much every 2 years or so at San Diego, he like lined himself up for a promotion and took more responsibility, which it is just San Diego. So I don't want to overstate it, but I also think it's important to look at somebody's career progression at a single place and say, were they given more? Like, were they doing a good job? Right. And it's encouraging to see a guy stay at the same place for 12 years and be given more responsibility pretty much every 2 years. After that, he goes to Michigan to reunite with Harbaugh, which again is an interesting piece to put in the puzzle here of this is not only a guy who worked for Harbaugh when he was very young at the beginning of his career, but he's a guy that Harbaugh wanted back, right? And he was able to get hired by Harbaugh again, and he spent a year at Michigan as an offensive analyst. And then when the XFL got started, he signed on with the DC Defenders to be their offensive coordinator and running backs coach. And that league went belly up, or not belly up, but COVID cut that season short. And so he ended up only being there for 5 games because eventually the XFL, I think, merged with the UFL and whatever happened there, right? And again, I don't want to overstate everything, but ran an okay offense in the XFL. He had the first win in XFL history. Also had the first shutout in XFL history. And then they finished the season 3-2 and really nothing super inspiring there. And then after that, he goes to the Lions, right? And I texted our chief hater, Megan, about Meigs, about this dude and basically just said, like, what do we know? And he was like, well, he got hired by Matt Patricia, so he's garbage, right? And I didn't say it back to Meigs, but Ben Johnson also got hired by Matt Patricia.
Matt Patricia
right?
loves telling people he hired Ben Johnson.
Exactly, right? And whether or not it works out with Ben Johnson in Chicago is yet to be seen. I think kind of going back to the press conference talk, a few of us were like a little like icked out by what we saw of the videos in Chicago and like how he was acting, and it was a little gaysish. So we'll see if that works out, right? Maybe Ben Johnson's garbage, but Ben Johnson's been a pretty damn good OC, and OC is the job we're hiring for. We're not hiring a head coach, right? So I don't know if you can necessarily put he got hired by Matt Patricia as a knock on the guy. And again, like we saw in his career at San Diego, he got given more and more every year in Detroit. He started out as an offensive assistant. He got moved to QC. He got moved to tight ends and passing game coordinator. And then he got moved to passing game coordinator full time. And the one thing that I did stumble across when I was Googling this guy is I stumbled across a Reddit thread of Detroit fans all arguing about this rumor that he's going to the Jets. And what some of them are saying is, we can't have anything nice. This guy was supposed to be the heir apparent. Why is he leaving us? And like, Detroit fans are upset with him leaving. Now, I don't know how much he was contributing in Detroit and how much of the pass game he was really running over Ben Johnson, but I think it's interesting to see Detroit fans kind of panic a little about potentially losing this guy. And other Detroit fans are arguing with him that John Morton isn't really an outside hire because John Morton was with the Lions for a couple of years before he went to Denver. And so, like, Google it. If you're listening to this and you want to read this Reddit thread, it's interesting. Google it. If you Google the guy's name, it's going to be one of the first things that pops up. Again, the name is Tanner Engstrand. And so, I don't know. It's all pretty interesting. I like that he's young. I like that as much as I think we all want to see some experienced head coaches join the staff, and whether that's going to be Todd Haley or Steve Wilkes or whoever else wants to come through the door here and help out as some kind of senior assistant that hopefully, in my eyes anyway, is not calling plays and holding a prominent coordinator role. I'd rather them kind of be his assistant and be like, work on game management together and being a head coach, right? That's what I want a former head coach to help out with is what did you learn being a head coach? How can you help me? And so I like that they're looking at a younger guy for a coordinator, just like they were with Kaylee. Um, on the defensive side, we're not talking about that yet, so I'll save my thoughts there. But yeah, I mean, I didn't see anything in this Eggstrand stuff that I'm like, oh my God, please no, right? Like it all kind of looks positive to me, and I'm trying not to paint the rosiest picture, but looks good. I like that he's young.
Yeah, I think, the thing we wanted to talk about, especially since, nothing has been set in stone yet, is like for both of the coordinator jobs, and we can open this up to defense too. Like, what are the things you're hoping Aaron Glenn accomplishes with those coordinator hires? And for me, it's two things. One, you already hit on is like the experience factor. And I think you do make a good point of like that person doesn't necessarily have to be a play caller. Obviously, Steve Wilkes is the leading candidate right now for the defensive coordinator job. He's been a great DC other places. He also, albeit limited, has some head coaching experience in the NFL, has a lot of head coaching experience of pitfalls and things to avoid that I think would be helpful for Aaron Glenn. But especially on the offensive side of the ball, which isn't necessarily Glenn's expertise, one of the things I'm looking for is innovation. And
Yes.
I think, when you're looking at a young guy, when you're looking at someone who studied under Ben Johnson, who has been one of the most innovative coordinators in the league the last few years, same goes with Kaylee. That was the attachment to McVay is what gave Kaylee that credence of he's an innovator. But I think, with Engstrand, he obviously probably, especially with his name being come up, has a relationship with Aaron Glenn from their years in Detroit. And you want someone who isn't going to do the same Hackett predictable, here's the stuff we're running where Jets fans are on their couch being like, here comes a run, here comes a run, here comes a pass every time.
Mm-hmm.
You want something different. And I do think, albeit in my admittedly limited knowledge of the guy, Lions fans have seemed to think that he, as Ben Johnson's understudy, was contributing to that innovation in Detroit. So I do think as far as different paths you can go down, this is the right sort of angle and approach you should be taking, especially with the hire on that side of the ball. What are you looking for as we narrow down these coordinator searches in terms of what qualities you want Aaron Glenn to target in his OC and his DC?
Everything you said is my top priority, right? So I think you couldn't have said it any better. Like, I am tired of running an archaic offense that is resistant to motion and is extremely predictable. Outside of Mike LaFleur, we have been doing outdated offensive things for a really long time. And those 2 years that we had Mike LaFleur, yes, he was saddled with a shitty quarterback. Yes, the roster wasn't really up to snuff yet. But like, Mike LaFleur made Braxton Berrios look like a pretty good NFL player, right? Like, he did some creative things. There were reverses, there was motion, there was exotic looking things happening on offense that I think was like, I'm not saying Mike LaFleur was a great coordinator. I'm saying it was moving in the right direction towards more of a modern NFL offense. And so that's why I'm more inclined to lean with a young guy rather than a guy who's been around the NFL forever calling plays. I do want those guys around. I like their input. I just don't want to be running an old West Coast offense with a little bit of a modern twist that resists some of the cooler things we see around the NFL and other places. As far as what else I'm looking for, I just want to see coordinators that take on the attitude that I hope Aaron Glenn is going to bring, which is basically what we see from Dan Campbell. Might I like it to be a little smarter and a little less like chaotic of just like, I'll go for it whenever the fuck I want and you never know what I'm going to do? Like, yeah, like maybe like a little more conventional than that, but I want to see them take on that attitude. So I want an offense that's aggressive, that's going to go up top, that's going to try to punch you in the mouth, that's going to try to take a lead early. And I want a defense that's going to be just as crazy and just as getting after it, right? And so I want to see the coordinators both take on the personality of the head coach. And I think that we know that the personality of the head coach is going to look something like a mesh of what we've seen from Dan Campbell and some of the older influences in Aaron Glenn's life, like Parcells and Peyton and some of those other guys, right? So like the kind of the smarts that like Parcells and Peyton and even Belichick bring of like knowing the rule book inside and out, knowing when to do weird stuff, knowing when to get a penalty called on you because it's going to be advantageous, blended with like uber aggressiveness. Like I want to see less punting. I want to see less of all that. I want to see more going for two. I want to see more aggression. So like that's really what I'm looking for, is that personality coupled with the modernity. Is that a word? Modernness that you talked about. So I was disappointed that Jim Leonard turned down the interview because that almost seemed perfect. Like it was like another former Jet who might be willing to come back, who was just working with Sean Payton, so he knows Aaron Glenn. Like it all kind of felt too perfect for him to just not even take the interview. I would have loved if he took the interview. So that was disappointing. Again, I want Steve Wilkes around. I'm just not sure I want him coaching the defense. And the one other thing I'll say, and I'll go back to Aaron Glenn for a second, during the press conference, they teed up a Sauce Gardner question for him. And I think they were all expecting like heap praise all over Sauce and like, let's get a good soundbite about how good Sauce is. And that is not what they got. Like they got, so earlier in his press conference, they asked Aaron Glenn about accountability. And he had a very, very good answer that was basically like, accountability is about expectation. And as long as I set the expectation up front, then I don't need to tell them that they're wrong or that they've screwed up because they already know that they didn't meet the expectation, right? And so they asked him a question about Sauce Gardner, and they're trying, like they, like 2 or 3 times, they were trying to get him to say how good Sauce Gardner is. And he like fended off the first one with just like, well, I got to watch all the tape from last year. Fended off the second one with like, I didn't really study him a lot coming out of college, but I know he's a hell of a player. And then like the third time they asked, he was like, yeah, well, he made the Pro Bowl his first 2 years, so I expect him to make the Pro Bowl again. And boom, expectation is set, right? Gauntlets laid down for Sauce Gardner now. So that I thought was a great sign for the defense. And I'm interested to see who he's going to bring in at coordinator.
If it's not Steve Wilkes, do you have a name in mind?
Jim I was like so emotionally invested in the potential of Jim Leonard that I really haven't I haven't expanded too far outside of that. I probably should have done a little bit more research.
Listen, I just put you on the spot. That's my fault. That's my fault. But you know, I mean, he Wilkes is the name that people have been talking about. So I was curious, just if Wilkes in the room, great. But if not, I was curious if you had a name in mind. But I understand like what you're going for, and I set this up by saying I was only going to ask you about the trade. So that was a little unfair of me just there.
It's all good.
Awesome. Well, any final thoughts? Thank you. I appreciate you letting me get stuff off my chest about just how good that press conference was. Any final thoughts before we wrap this episode?
No, I think, the one thing we didn't really touch on was like special teams. And I know people have floated out Darren Rizzi, which like, I don't know, special teams coordinator is like a little bit of a weird step after being an interim head coach, but if he's willing to do it, like I'm certainly open to it. I believe it is rumored that Westhoff will be in the orbit. I don't believe he takes the job because Mike Westhoff has been old for 40 years. So like, I don't know. I just don't see it happening, but like, I'd like to have him back in the orbit somehow. And whoever does become the special teams coordinator, I'd like Westhoff to like be in their ear a little bit. So that'll be interesting to see. Other than that, like we're entering a pretty, hopefully a page turning kind of summer for the Jets where we can kind of bury what happened a little bit. It's curious to see what happens with Aaron Rodgers. I really appreciated him saying this is not about Aaron Rodgers. And I think, again, that was like a moment of the expectation and the gauntlet being laid down of like, this is what this team is all about now. And so it's just nice to feel some goddamn positivity for the first time in a while.
Put your seatbelts on, get your shirt. Paul designed an amazing shirt. Very honestly, like you should be a graphic designer in another life. You did good work there. So please, everyone, get your shirts, support the pod, support Aaron Glenn, and we will talk to you guys soon.
And come to the live event. Jake's going to be there.
Come to the live event, April 11th. Live event, New York City. I will be there. Facts. See you guys there. Peace.